All right, so obviously for my presentation, we don't get to have a discussion piece to it because I'm sitting at home by myself. And so this is my presentation on chapter 7 from the Graham book, which is on Kantianism. I assume I said that wrong. Anyway, I wanted to particularly hit on what Kant had to say about goodwill / intentions, the categorical imperatives, as well as pure practical reason. Obviously covering as much of the chapter as possible, but just kind of I particularly liked those sections and wanted to call them out. Yeah. I apologize for whatever interruptions happened during this recording because that's how life is. Anyway, so the first piece is the concept of goodwill. And so Kant was very focused on looking at the difference of how do we do well or try to do well and what's kind of underneath that. And so he made a point of stressing that intentions matter. Even when our good is thwarted, the goodwill that we used would still sparkle as a jewel in its own right, as something that had full worth in itself, to quote him directly. Excuse me, which also lends itself to the opposite of that. And just because someone benefits from something not great that we did against them, it's still a mark on us in terms of morality. And part of that is he also takes it a step further and says we also need to take into it's okay. Through the magic of video editing, I now have my research assistant, Booty, with me. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think of goodwill? Are you going to make this so hard to do? Yeah, you are. Okay. So, so the idea of our motivation for even our well-intended things that, let me slow down. So he kind of draws the line on, it's a question of intentions versus actions, because a lot of times, even when we intend to do well, things don't work out. And yeah. And so part of it is looking at whether or not our actions work out, what our intentions were, but also taking a step further and looking at whether we were doing something because it was the right thing to do, or if we also had some kind of secondary gain. And so, and kind of drawing out, speaking directly from what was in the book, there's a difference between the actions of someone who spontaneously and with pleasure does what is right, and the same actions done on the part of someone who performs them perhaps with difficulty solely because it is right. And we should aim to do what is right because it is right. And so the success in completing that is not morally crucial. And so whether or not our natural inclinations support or oppose the good action are irrelevant, because we cannot command our feelings, as well as whether one's good intentions come off or not, because we cannot completely control the world around us. In fact, I'd argue that we can't control it at all now, can we? And so if the only unqualifiedly good thing is a goodwill, and if the goodwill is not good because of that in which it results, how are we to determine or demonstrate its goodness? And so the idea is that the only way our will can be unqualifiedly good is it has to be purely rational. I'd like to take a moment and say that I don't like this emphasis on rationality. What do you think, bud? I know, we don't live in a rational world, now do we? All right, I can't open it up to discussion with the class, so I guess I'll open it up to discussion with Booty. And so there was look at theoretical versus practical reason, which comes from Hume. And so the idea is from that, that led Kant to try to provide an alternative account of practical reason. And from that, we get two types of imperatives. He talks about the hypothetical imperative or the categorical imperative. And so a hypothetical is, it's an if-then statement. If I want to complete this recording with a minimal need for editing, I should probably put this child down. I'm not going to do that though. Categorical. So the if-then statement is like, if you want this, you need to do that. A categorical imperative rests upon no hypothetical condition. And because of that, it cannot be rejected by denying any conditional desire. And so to give the example I just gave, I rejected the idea of reducing the amount of editing I need to do because I did not want to put Booty down, despite the fact that he would like me to put him down. And so Kant saw the categorical imperative as the heart of morality. They transcend our wants and desires by presenting us with rational principles of action in the light of which those desires themselves are to be assessed. The categorical imperative is the overriding principle of conduct. Someone, you're not being purely rational. What is this? And so in order to square the circle, we can ground the categorical imperative in overriding principles in reason. And so Kant doesn't really appeal to moral facts, but we can check the rationality of categorical imperatives by examining them in the light of what he calls pure practical reason. Pure because it involves no appeal to matters of empirical fact or sensory experience, but to principles of practical reasoning alone. And so this kind of is, you know, when we kind of have liftoff into the world of, we can't measure this, so here's what we can argue about type of thing, I guess, is the best way to put it in terms of this course. And so pure practical reason, we have the kind of like thought experiment, if you will, that if there was a world of perfectly rational beings, Graham refers to them as the angels, they will always do what we, being less than perfect, always ought to do. So these are the people with that pure reason, pure rationality. Obviously, this is not true for people. Graham points out we experience objectively right as a constraint on action. And the psychological force of this ought derives in part from the fact that our natural inclinations often lie in other directions. Because I have to bring everything back to psychology, I will point out that the term for this in psychology is called psychological reactance. Whenever there is something that you perceive to be limiting your options, and you just kind of get that like gut level, like, well, I'm going to put it in nicer terms than I normally do. Well, like, you can go fly a kite type of thing. That kind of like instinctively, like, I'll tell you what you can do type of thing. That's what we call psychological reactance. It's not rational, which is why it is not something that the angels of Kant's perfectly rational world would do. And so, but through this idea, we are able to identify what the moral law is. And so he talked about maxim as being the reason for an action. And so, and so in order to identify the pure practical reason, response to things. So the purely practical reasoning behind behavior, it would be to ask ourselves, could acting on that maxim be a law of nature in a world of perfect beings? Booty, I don't think rational with, because they don't feel that psychological reactance, that sense of constraint. There's no sense of being bound or required. And from this, we can see that in a perfectly rational world, the laws of rationality would be like the laws of nature in the real world. I kind of like, this is the point in these discussions that I tend to like struggle to focus, because it becomes a question of, okay, we're talking about a world that doesn't exist. And I think we can talk about what we want the world to look like, how we want people to respond to things. But in reality, we just straight up do not have the option of changing things, of having that perfectly rational world. And so it's kind of like when a client comes in and says to me, well, I wouldn't have responded that way if they had just said this instead of that. And I tend to immediately respond with, that's true. However, that and $1.50 is going to get you a cup of coffee, and that's about it. And by that, I mean, like, it doesn't really mean much, because that isn't an option. And so it's kind of interesting that this is pure practical reason, because it's not very practical to even have the conversation, in my opinion. And this is very, so I have my not perfectly rational being here with me still. I have my perfectly irrational being here with me, my son, John, who I call Booty. And so anyway, and so I kind of wanted to finish up with the concept of, I'm gonna say this wrong, universalizability, or I won't say it wrong. And so the idea is it provides a way of kind of like a yardstick, if you will, in terms of measuring whether or not a piece of philosophy makes sense, if it's sound, and if what morality requires of us is satisfactory, is the wording that Graham used in the book. And so universalizability is the procedure of seeing whether your own reasons for actions could apply to everyone equally, or whether they amount to special pleading in your own case. And so the application of this here is, if you are questioning whether or not something is morally right, thinking about it and saying, okay, but like, what if everyone else did this? And if you need some sort of like kind of special situation where it works out, meaning like, I don't want everyone to do this, but it's okay that I do this, because like that immediately calls into question the intentions, the action, that type of thing. Okay, and so from that, we kind of have to look at the question of what if everyone did that, and we have to look at how we interpret that. One way is interpreting it is the consequences of everyone doing the action in question are highly undesirable. Alternatively, oh, he got into my Post-it notes. That's going to be a mess. Can I have the pen though? That's where you could do some real damage. Second interpretation is there are some actions which would be impossible for everyone to perform, with the result that any attempt to justify performing them must involve some special pleading on the part of the individual. And so the idea is, you know, avoiding that kind of situation where you kind of decide that the behavior is okay just this one time or just this one special situation, is keeping things all universal. And so the fundamental moral law is one which requires from us, quote, respect for persons. I particularly like this quote from Kant: act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. And so the idea is treating people like people, not treating people like things. And so, oh, hi, can you not break that? And so the idea is, I mean, it's a little bit golden rule-ish, but I think it goes a step further. And that is, you know, really recognizing the humanity in the other person and saying, like, this person is their own person with their own rich and complicated internal life. And I need my behavior to not only be the right thing to do, but the thing that also is right by their humanity as well. And so I just kind of wanted to finish off a little bit with some of the critique of Kant's work that was in and so the first piece is the idea of it's your intentions, it's not your actions, it's the thought that counts, which in a lot of ways it is, but at the same time, I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of intention versus impact. And from that, a lot of times when I'm talking to people, whether it be clients, whether it be colleagues, whether it be my direct reports, real 360 of my life, really, you know, I always like to kind of pull things out and both check myself as well as remind other people of the intention of our actions. Like, yeah, it's very important what we intend, but as far as it comes, once our intentions hit the real world, we are also responsible for the impact. We do have to face the consequences of what's going on, as well as the idea of they really took it to a super extreme example with the idea of intending to murder someone is wrong, and it doesn't really matter whether or not you actually murder them. That's why people can be charged with attempted murder, and why that's a different crime from assault, for example. And so they kind of also talk about, like, if you're just sitting at home, like intending to do things and like they never get off the ground, like at a certain point, I feel like there's very good reason to question the morality of that. Also, looking at the universalizability test, these last few chapters, when it gets to the question of challenging some of the things said by the philosophers, is I mean, with the existentialism chapter in this chapter, it's kind of like, but what about the Nazis? And so the idea is the test is too easily satisfied. And so the idea is with the universalizability test, and the idea that good actions are made good by the good faith from which they are performed. If you have someone who commits heinous crimes, but they're sincere in their intentions, that's not great. As well as another version is if we talk about, you know, should you act this way in every single situation like this, you have what Graham calls the consistent Nazi. And so the idea is the kind of hypothetical situation of if someone is enthusiastically fascist and is a Nazi and is discovered to have Jewish ancestry. And so the question be like, do you still support the idea of extermination, or do you suddenly want a little bit more nuance to that conversation? And the quote from the book is, if a policy of genocide is deeply mistaken for a moral point of view, consistency in its application, it's hardly any improvement. And so, oh my goodness. And so in the discussion of this video, beyond comments about how amazingly handsome my son is, I guess kind of looking at kind of your reactions to this, the idea of intentions over actions, like, really throws me, because one, I tend to be someone who is a little suspicious of anything that remains purely cognitive. I think we need more than that in life. Is a little suspicious of anything that remains purely cognitive. I think we need more than that in life. Oh, did you find my keyboard? Mm-hmm. Oh, hi. What are you doing? Oh my God. I forgot what I was saying. Can I just submit 20 minutes of us laughing at each other? Will I get good grades for that? Will I? Oh God. So here, chase the dog. So some discussion ideas for this video. Kind of your idea about how kind of Kant, I don't want to say splits the hair, because it's not really splitting hairs. It's, you know, talking about how do we weigh things in terms of intention, motivation, and action. Because I feel like I'm not the only person in this class who tends to have a lot of conversations around intention and impact, but also the idea of goodwill and duty for duty's sake. And that's just, I didn't put a lot of time into talking about it in here. I also just kind of feel, what are you breaking now? Because I feel like if I enjoy anything that I need to do because it's my duty, like the fact that that lessens it, I don't know, it just feels like, let's suck all the joy. Yeah, and so the idea of intention, motivation, action, as well as this idea of that inheritance, in terms of like, this is what I need to do, not because I want to get somewhere, but because like this is a purely rational thing that I need to do. I appreciate your patience with all of the distractions. I have no idea how I'm going to edit this video together so it makes sense. But yeah, looking forward to our conversation around this.